So then I will enter in English. And first of all, I will be quite short because a lot of things have been said today, and I will not repeat them. It's useless. It's already said. And a lot of things were very interesting and very positive. So there is no reason why I would repeat them. The second thing I want to say is that I changed my intervention just after the Gaza resolution at the United Nations, because I think that it changed a lot of things concerning, of course, the international law, but concerning also the real balance of power between what we call the collective West or the global South. So for the moment, if we look at the BRICS, it happened, it appears, or it wants to appear like an alliance of states promoting something we forgot about, which was the new economical world order that was decided at the United Nations in the 70s, and that had been brought back at the United Nations in 2023 when Cuba was leading the group of the 77 at the UN and forced with 140 countries of the UN the rebuild of the idea of new international world order. So when we talk about BRICS, we cannot talk only about BRICS. We have to talk about other alliances which more or less are at least officially tending to rebuild the international relations. We talked about the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. We talked about the non-aligned movement, which is still existing. We talked about the Group of 77, which now is more than 77 plus China, because it's its official name at the UN. It's more than 140 states. And we have also to talk about some regional alliance, sometimes very radical like the ALBA in Latin America, sometimes much less radical like the ASEAN. But I think that ASEAN is an interesting example of subcontinental organization much more efficient than the European Union. Because ASEAN is not centralized and because ASEAN is respecting the sovereignty of its members. But nobody in Europe wants to talk about the ASEAN as a counterexample. So I think it's very important to have a discussion why ASEAN works and why EU is not working. This should be told. It was not told, but it has to be told. I mean, we have examples in the world of alliances working, but on a very clear basis. And that's important because the European Union wants to be ideologically monolithic. But ASEAN, you have absolute monarchies, you have constitutional monarchies, you have liberal democracy, you have socialist states, and they are all in the same ASEAN. You have Christian states, you have Muslim states, you have Buddhist states, and they are in the same alliance. So I think ASEAN is a much better example than the European Union, anyway. So that's why I talked about ASEAN as a counterexample working. More or less, it's not the ideal paradise, but still it works. And it's not so aggressive as the European Union in the same time. And it has to be also told. So, if we look at all this architecture, BRICS, SCO, NAM, ASEAN, Group of 77, and so on, we can note that they're developing economical cooperation, scientific projects, cultural cooperations, commercial links, new money in the direction of de-dollarization, new transport roads, and of course the best known example is the Belt and Road Initiative from China, but it's not the only one. So I would say that BRICS and other alliance more or less linked with what we call the global south, which were earlier the third world, is something that they are preparing some tools for a future alternative. But in the same time, we must also acknowledge that the new economical world order is still not existing, and the Gaza resolution I told about is the proof that BRICS and its ally is not, for the moment, an alternative. Because at the UN, they passed a law, a resolution, which is purely colonial, which couldn't be imagined all over after the Second World War, because it's the first time we have at the United Nations a blatant example of non-respecting the right of people to self-determination, because what they are trying to do in Gaza is recolonization. It means foreign powers are supposed to govern Gaza. Wherever these foreign powers are Western or Arab, anyway, they're not Palestinian. And it's colonization, pure colonization, and it couldn't have been imagined, let's say 30 years ago, 40 years ago. At least there would have been an appearance of local, let's say, collaborators. And that's very important. So Gaza resolution is showing that the BRICS country, and especially Russia and China, but also another country which surprised a lot of observers, Algeria, behave at the United Nations in a, you cannot tell they behave in a non-aligned way. They align themselves to the world powers. The reasons for that are very clear, and we can of course talk about it very long, but it means that the balance of power at the world level now is still in favor of the West, and especially the United States. We have to be very clear about that. Maybe, and I think that the BRICS is preparing tools, as I told, for the future alternative in the world. But for the moment, it's only preparing tools. The West and the United States especially are still the most important superpower. And I would say even that the United States, for the moment, are stronger than they were 20 or 10 years ago. Because 20 years ago, they couldn't have passed at the UN Security Council such a law as they pushed now. So the balance of power, for the short, the contradictions are stronger than they were, because on a certain sense, I would say United States on the short term are stronger. But on the long term, they are weaker, and we see it all the day. So they know that they are losing on the long term. So they have to fight back, to roll back, as it was told at the time of the bipolar world. They have to roll back much more consistently than never they did earlier, which is a sign of weakness for the long term and a sign of strength for the short term. And of course, it's a very difficult time, because when you are weak for the long term and when you are strong at the short term, the natural tendency in world history is to go to war, to active war. Of course, now we are in atomic time, so it's a little bit more complicated to launch war than at the time we had the First and the Second World War. But logically, if we are thinking mathematically, the United States and their allies should launch a war. Because it's the moment, and it would not be the moment in 20 years or even in 10 years. So that's the thing I want we think about. And in this situation, when I told that the United States are more aggressive than ever, and Europe is more aggressive even than the United States, because Europe is, let's say, lucky of imperialists, but they are much more, they are anti-European in a certain side, as it was told earlier, because you have to fight between populations and oligarchies. But the European oligarchies is much more aggressive than the American oligarchy. We have also to take that into account. Why this is the case, we have to think about it. But von der Leyen is much more aggressive than Trump. Whatever we think about Trump, it's not a question I love him or I hate him. But it's very important to say that Trump is less aggressive than von der Leyen. Yeah, but I think we can discuss about it. But I think that we have to take that into account. But on the same time, and it's interesting because it's the difference between long run and short run. You have countries which were traditionally completely pro-Western, like Nigeria, like United Arab Emirates, like Saudi Arabia, and a lot of other countries, which are looking toward BRICS. And I would say they look toward BRICS like an insurance policy. In case dollar and United States vanish, we have to have something in reserve. And, you know, the emirs of the Gulf are not known for their historical vision. But still they understood this situation. And it's interesting because it's the proof that things are basically going to be basically transformed. The question is when and how. And that, of course, I'm not a prophet, so I cannot tell you what will happen. We can go either toward World War II. It's a possibility. You know, when we hear last week's intervention of the chief of the l'état-major, how do you say it?
General Staff.
General Staff of the French Army to the Mayor of France. I mean, we couldn't have imagined that for the last 100 years. It's warmongering, but completely cut from the reality of its own people. And it shows us what you told earlier, that between the oligarchies and the population there are a complete gap. And this chief of staff didn't realize that he was talking to mayors who have contact, whatever their political belongings is, but they have contact with people, and they couldn't accept that. So I mean, it's completely ludicrous if you think about those elites which are completely out of reality. The problem is that they are not only leading France, they are leading all the European Union. They are still strong, very, very strong in the United States because the so-called deep state doesn't disappear, etc., etc. So they are not just ludicrous people which would normally land in the asylum or the psychiatric hospital, but they are leading the world toward catastrophe. And that we have to understand this situation. But on the other side, we have also contradiction. And the contradiction between population and oligarchy is a very important one. Because what makes the difference between BRICS and non-aligned movement of the 60s and 70s, it's the fact that the non-aligned movement at that time was, of course, an alliance of elite, of local bourgeoisie, of local elite, but with big people's mobilization. We cannot imagine non-aligned movement without the strength of, for example, talking about Indonesia, of the Communist Party of Indonesia, which had 3 million people, 1 million of them were killed in 1965. We cannot imagine China becoming a world power without the Chinese Revolution. We cannot imagine even now Russia being a world power if there hadn't been the Russian Revolution. Whatever we think about that revolution, but it was a revolution and a popular mobilization. We cannot think about Iran, not taking into account that this country is maybe not revolutionary anymore, but at least post-revolutionary. Whatever we think about the revolution, the question is not I like it or I don't like. The question is what are their roots, what are their legitimacy, and on which base they built their legitimacy. But if we observe, for example, Russia today, and to a certain extent even China, whatever we think about official ideologies of these two states, basically the masses of the Chinese people or the Russian people are not directly connected with what happens. I mean, Putin has not the courage or the possibility to mobilize the Russian people as Stalin and the Communist Party did in 1941. Whatever we think about Stalin, but anyway, he managed to mobilize the masses in a fight, which is not the case of Putin, because Putin has a lot of oligarchs in its pocket, but they know that if you mobilize the Russian people, the Russian people doesn't like the regime actually, not for national reason, but for social justice. I mean, the most unpopular people in Russia, according to all polls, are the oligarchs. They are hated, and a lot of Russians in 2022 thought, oh, this war will allow the government of Russia to get rid of those oligarchs, which was not the case. And some oligarchs did, some did not. And I say Russia is an interesting example. I will finish on that with two examples. On one side, who is the leader of the Russian National Bank? It's Elvira Nabiulina. Elvira Nabiulina is completely on the line of the the fund. So she's completely neoliberal. She's completely aligned with the ideology that dominated the West since the neoliberal counter-revolution. But on the other side, you have people like Glaziev, who is advocating Eurasian integration and more social justice. But all that is inside the power of Russia. So there is a fight. We can observe, of course, very differently, but I was in China, we can observe the same in China. When you talk with Chinese leadership from the Central Committee, you have to say only one word if you want to know if he is really a liberal or a communist. This word is key word in China, Mao Zedong.
Mao Zedong.
Mao Zedong. And if you say Mao Zedong and you see that he goes to another subject, you understand he's a liberal. But if his eyes begin to shine and he thought, oh, you know Mao Zedong and so on, then you understand he still thinks revolution was a good thing, and maybe we have to do another one. And I discussed with both, and I can tell you, but of course, Chinese are very cautious. They don't tell it very loudly, but you find that China is a very pluralistic society. And the best example is that you have 10,000 strikes every year in China, which is, of course, China is a huge country. But what can be 10,000 strikes? In the old time, we would have called that a class struggle. Because 10,000 strikes is quite huge, anyway. So, I mean, the basic problem of the so-called BRICS, non-aligned movement, SCO, and so on, is that if they really want to create tools for an alternative, there should be earlier or later people's mobilization. It means that societies has to intervene, not only the power. Whatever we like or we don't like the powers, but the powerful will not do anything if they have not the pressure from the bottom. That was a lecture we had already in the 20th century, but it's still important in the 21st century. Okay, so I finished.